Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thanks for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. I'm Scott Burleson, and joining me as always, my co-hosts Jan Vermouth and Jonathan Edwards. And now for something completely different. We're turning over the microphone to Pam Henderson. Pam is an entrepreneur, professor, founder and CEO of New Edge, a growth strategy firm that anchors growth and opportunity. She's the author of a book with the intriguing title, Killing Ideas. You can kill an idea, but you cannot kill an opportunity. But today we're passing the interviewer role to Pam. And while in this case, Jonathan and I will be the guests, and our topic is a common one here, which is jobs to be done. Pam, welcome back to the show, and we're looking forward to this.
Yeah, thank you guys. I so appreciate this. It's a ton of fun. So I get to interview you. So turnabout's fair play. So I just want to start with some basics. Talk to me a little bit about how Jobs to be Done was kind of a breakthrough in consumer insight.
Yeah. All right. I'll jump in. That's gonna be our toughest thing is who jumps in first. I'll kick it off, and then you guys have to sort of take the next one. Well, in one sense, it's not that new. And there's back to Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun, Sure. And in fact, with any business model or concept, if somebody claims that it's completely new, boy, I'm skeptical right off the bat. There was this older concept, and you could probably go back and, hundreds of years or more about, focusing on the benefits as opposed to the features of a product, and so these were the earlier iterations, I would say. I mean, and it's funny where things like this turn up. They turn up, historically, they turn up in sales training. But also, if you look at the old advertising and marketing guys, mainly advertising guys from like the late 1800s on through early in this century, they were all over this concept of, hey, what can the product do for you? Let's talk about that. Let's sell that. Let's sell these attributes or sell what it does for you as opposed to the feature. So in that sense, we could call that the historical roots of Jobs to be Done.
Sure.
Well, then the next question is, well, why do we need it? What's unique about it? Well, the language was not very precise, and it was very casual. Benefit. I just throw benefits and product features.
Absolutely.
What even are those? But the leap forward that Jobs to be Done made was it's funny, we were actually talking before the show, we were talking about language and how languages change and evolve.
Yeah.
But what Jobs to be Done provided was a precise language.
I love that.
A customer hires all based on the metaphor, a customer hires a product to accomplish a job. But Jobs to be Done doesn't leave you with the word customer, because all of a sudden, that can be a bit vague. Is that the person who buys it, who uses it, who influences it? So you have specific terms for those. And so I could go on and on. But in a nutshell, it gave more precision in language to the previously vague ideas of separating features and benefits. Now I'll turn it over to my friends here, see if they have anything to add.
I really like that. I want to just maybe add one thing where I felt like, okay, this for me was really a perspective shift. So I think Scott is 100% right. I think the concept of moving away from the product that's been there some way or another for a long time. But what really changed for me when I read Christensen, when he says it's a different unit of analysis. He contrasted with a persona or demographic approach, where he says, well, kind of marketers used to obsess about age, gender, income, city, or what social demographics are.
Yeah.
But Jobs to be Done, it switches the unit of analysis, and that for me was like, oh wow, okay, yes, we're looking at something different than the factors that maybe are used or traditionally are still used today very often to describe a customer and what a market is about.
Yeah.
So that for me was a fundamental shift.
I love that.
Trying to understand is not the person, which sounds weird, but we're trying to understand the job they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Which shifts the perspective. That for me is really changes a lot.
Oh, I love that.
And I would say there, as just reiterate what Scott said, and Jan, there are tons of different frameworks that re-emphasize similar points and have, let's say, a similar philosophy. There's, and as Scott very well mentioned, in advertising, they were some of the first to actually think in that way, thinking about benefits. But you have, Alan Cooper's goal-directed design is, I think, definitely ties into jobs to be done. You have even, I would even say, fault tree analysis, which is analyzing root causes in a way, is the same kind of philosophy. You have means end chains in advertising, which try to connect means and ends, and so I think this has been around for a long time. I think what is interesting about jobs to be done is that often these notions in innovation were maybe mentioned, but they are part of a much wider discussion. So people in design will often say, oh yeah, I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, of course, in design we talk about this and that, but they don't actually make it really the focus. It's part of the whole system that they've got in place, but it's not the main focus. And I think that's what's attractive about jobs to be done, is that it tries to not do too much. It does a very specific thing, and it focuses on doing that very well.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's stellar. So just a little context for the listeners. The reason that I'm doing this is because first I was a guest, and then I decided I couldn't stop talking to these guys. But second, I am in the process of revising my book, which is on how to think about opportunities. And as we talked about in that podcast, I see opportunity. The word comes from the word port. It means into port. And it was this picture of this boat getting into port. And so it was this picture of the market with the needs, right? And that's where the jobs to be done is that in that market with those needs. But it was also a picture of the boat with the value propositions, how it got there, the channel, the goods, the technologies, the stuff they were selling. And then the third component was the conditions. So Jonathan, at risk of making it complicated again and adding a couple other components, I see the bigger opportunity is marrying up the jobs to be done and the needs with those consumers, right? And sure, they have demographics and occasions and all that kind of stuff swimming around in the port, right, with them. And then we've got the value propositions from technology push and from new capabilities and new channels. And then we've got the trends that make now the right time. So my fascination with this and my excitement on this was just to be sure that I do this justice when I'm thinking about needs. So I have a whole chapter just on needs, and you guys are going to be heroes in that chapter. So I'd love to hear from you, just maybe one of your favorite success stories, just maybe a quick thing. We all know, people don't buy a drill, they buy a hole, right? And that's such a powerful analogy. But I'd love to just maybe hear just from you guys, a couple of your favorite success stories. And then one of my goals is to think about how can we make sure that we're understanding this in the context of a couple of these other elements of opportunity. And that's where I'm going to go next. But first, I really want to hear just your favorite success stories.
I'll throw one out there quickly, give these guys a chance to think. The story that I most often tell is the one where I actually was the product manager. Sometimes we work with a lot of companies, and different companies have different levels of comfort with you telling their stories. So I'll tell my story.
Awesome.
We were replacing. I was a product manager with John Deere. We were replacing a tractor series, and when you're in an agricultural business like that, I mean, it's really, you can become fooled into thinking a couple things. One, that people really love your brand because they sort of do, John Deere, because they have John Deere mailboxes, but you become fooled into thinking it's enough. But clearly you can't, that's not enough, but you can be fooled into thinking it when they're wearing t-shirts and have whatever, it has your brand on there. So you start to think they care about your brand a lot. But in this case, we were replacing a new tractor series, and we used a jobs to be done methodology to understand the challenges with the old series. And one of the challenges they had was minimize the time to change implements. In other words, the attachments, the tools that attach to the mower. In particular, one was a mid mower that goes underneath a tractor. And I'll just describe the situation prior to the project. You had to change your mower. It was underneath the tractor. You had to get down on the ground, and you had to stick your arms in there, and it was greasy, and it was dirty, and it was heavy. This thing was very heavy. So you can imagine this was an area of dissatisfaction, but it just comes very simply down to one way of expressing the need is, minimize the physical effort to change this mid-moor deck. And that's what the customer wanted to do. And if you could make it easier, all of a sudden, whether it's John Deere or Kubota or New Holland, that's not going to be quite as important anymore if you really help them with that problem, minimize the physical effort to remove the mower deck. Now, it turns out this was a difficult technical problem to solve. A lot of problems, but here's a sort of a lesson in jobs to be done anyway. If something's unsolved, there's usually a reason for it. I'd love to eat donuts all day and be super healthy, but there's some reason. If a problem's not solved, there's some reason. And in this case, it was just technically difficult to do. But with the jobs to be done project, we had the data that really demonstrated that this was a significant opportunity in the sense that you mean it.
Yes.
And that's also important to use this type of data to communicate it back internally into the company. Because if something's difficult to solve, it's difficult to solve. And that means you need to spend time on it. You need to spend money on it. And it means your leaders need to find something that they are incredibly short supply of, which is patience. When you're trying to solve it, when you're working. And anyway, we ultimately did solve that problem. We created some. We actually ended up. It took a long time to solve. The approach ended up being having two development teams, engineering teams, working in parallel, working on the same problem, and then they would share information. So it was really a very large effort. But then we solved it, and the way we solved it, the new tractor drives over the deck, and this thing mechanically attaches itself, and then it was a tremendous success in the market. It's a John Deere 1 family. There were other things about that too, from a jobs to be done perspective I could describe, but for brevity, I'll stick to that one, which was the most dramatic, and it was also the one that we had to continually go back to leadership, and they were like, "Have you fixed it yet?" And we were like, "No." But look, we've got this data that says if we do, it's going to be a big deal. And they were not overly patient, but we had a lot of confidence. And I'll add one more bit to that, then I'll let these other guys talk. It's when you use jobs to be done, or for that matter, other research for this, it's very important that the engineering team is all aligned on solving this problem. And so we started out talking about language, importance of language, minimize the physical effort to attach the mower deck. I didn't say make it easier to attach the mower deck, minimize the physical effort to attach the mower deck,
really
which is very precise in what the problem is we need to solve. You get the engineers aligned, and it's right now it's 2024. It's been in the market 15 years, and it prints money. I wish I got a share of it, but I don't.
Some royalties.
That's a genius story, Scott. And I love it too, because it's B2B. Well, it's kind of B2B. And I love that because I think that that's an easy thing to think is that, oh, this works with consumers, but not more with people that own businesses that are making these decisions. I love the precision too, because I think it's easy to say, okay, well, the opportunity is labor saving. We've been doing some work on roofing. It turns out if you save labor, you don't necessarily get a person off the roof. I could do a whole lot of labor saving things in a bunch of roofing materials, but I don't get somebody off the roof because every job still takes maybe 2 people to hold something, right? So I have to be precise about, am I trying to shorten the length of the job? Am I trying to reduce the size of the crew? Those are different things, but they're both in this broad umbrella of labor saving. So I love the precision. Any other great fun stories?
Well, maybe I can jump in quite quickly. I'll try and be brief. So I don't have an extensive experience with a fully fledged jobs to be done project. So surveys, interviewing users, etc. I don't have that experience. On the other hand, I have used it very often just in, let's say, using the lens, as people say in jobs to be done, the way of seeing things. And this has helped me countless times to, for instance, reject a project at some time. So you talk to someone who has some kind of business idea. I had this with someone where we discussed some kind of transportation app that we wanted to develop. kind of a side thing to Uber, that kind of direction. And just the person was very excited about the whole technical aspect and doing this, and just going through, okay, who are we making this for? What are the jobs they're trying to solve, et cetera, allowed us to, after some time, just drop the idea. And so I've used it countless times in day-to-day, just to refine my thinking about projects.
Jonathan, I want to build on that because I had this experience as well as I was starting to develop this model of opportunity of, you have to have this Venn diagram where you do have needs in the market that marry up with the right solution. I also want calorie-free donuts, and the right conditions, right? We have to have that Venn diagram. But to what you just said, I think is really profound because I remember coming to my leadership team once and saying, oh, I have this idea. Let's go do this, right? Well, I have ideation in my strengths finder. So I've got no end of ideas coming out, right? And this is the whole reason why I came up with the phrase, you can kill an idea, you can't kill an opportunity. It's that same thing you just said, was that I saw all these startups that would have all these ideas when I was commercializing technologies for one of the national labs. There were scientists with endless ideas, but I didn't know what the larger opportunity was, which meant we weren't marrying those ideas for how to create value up with the needs, right? Well, I had this experience as a leader because I would come to my management team with these ideas and they'd be kind of aggravated. And, I think that it was sometimes too many ideas at one time, but one time they really didn't love one of my favorite ideas. Like I was so excited about doing this. And this was an organizational improvement idea. And I happened to be getting on a plane, and I remember sitting on the plane and having to force myself to ask myself about the opportunity formula. Okay, what are the conditions and what are the needs? And by the end of that flight, I was like, this is a terrible idea. And I was like, once I better understood the needs, and that's really those jobs to be won. Once I articulated, here are the bigger needs and here are the organizational conditions, I was like, oh, this idea would solve for 2% of the problem here. But once I articulated the problem better, it was really obvious, like that wasn't the right answer. And
Exactly.
I was convinced it was the right answer at the beginning of that flight. And so I think it's a really powerful thing that you're saying, Jonathan, that I don't think I have even completely embraced just because I'm not as well trained in jobs to be done. I'm very trained in strategic planning around bigger opportunities and then leveraging good content on jobs to be done. And we do some, but I think you guys are much more deeply trained. I think I'm going to start applying that to all of my management decisions, just articulating it that way, as opposed to just saying, okay, what's the opportunity here, the needs, the value creators, and the conditions. So that's a good one for me.
I would just add one caveat, which is you don't want to be a total buzzkill. And sometimes having, people who are passionate about an idea is also, I think, very valuable. And you can also maybe find opportunity as you develop the idea. So I just think it brings also a common language, which is an additional benefit that when you're talking with people, you can actually lay it down and everyone can think about the whatever project together.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole, where does tech push fit into this? I'm going to ask you guys some questions about that in a second. So I think that's kind of what you're saying is like sometimes there is inspiration that we need to protect and hold for a moment before we dismiss it because we can't articulate the need. So Jan?
Anything? Yeah, maybe my kind of quick 2 cents. I think what Jonathan mentioned is important because I never really liked the idea of celebrating failure, but I think we should celebrate saying no much more.
Yeah, I love that.
It's always easy from the outside to say, well, let's try 1,000 things, and if it fails, well, if it's not your job on the line, that's easy to say, right? But let's celebrate saying no. I think that may be a good thing to do. Okay, but just maybe a quick story that connects us again to more this also the value proposition question, where I think kind of jobs to be done can show in before and after. So I really like that story, and it shows also how for how long a job to be done inside stays valid. So the industry is financial services for people that retire. So in Switzerland, at least, you have this. So you have the pension fund, you pay in money as you work. This is probably well known. And then at the end, kind of when you're approaching your end of the career, You can decide whether you take out the money as a whole, or you kind of take a rent. So if you get
Sure.
recurring, so or you can split it and all these stuff. And that's a huge market in Switzerland. Everybody is basically fighting for it. And we worked for a company that provided these services. So this is also maybe interesting to see because the product didn't change. The only thing changed was the marketing story around it.
Oh,
Uh, so they struggled a lot. They launched this new product for exactly these pensioners, so putting money aside, and then they wanted to convince, of course, as many pensioners as possible or people approaching the retirement to take out the money and give it to them, basically, so they could do investments and all that kind of stuff. So, and the story they were telling, or the value proposition kind of that they were telling is, well, now that you're retiring, shouldn't you stop worrying about money? Just go on playing golf and kind of laying in the sun, and we'll take care of your money. And it didn't work at all. It didn't connect at all. So we ran a jobs to be done project. We tried to understand how people retire and what goes through their mind. And for a large chunk of them, what came out very clearly, there was a whole segmentation effort involved, but a large chunk what came out is I exactly don't want to give my money away and kind of go hiding into a goal, but I struggle to stay relevant and useful after retirement. I'm scared that after I retire, I've got nothing to do and nobody kind of. So they wanted to have the ownership.
Mm.
They did before it was even in the name. Kind of the product was named something like your retirement, some kind of I don't remember it now, but there was some kind of retirement fund name, blah blah blah, and then they switched the product name to My Pension. So, and you had a lot of tools where they were kind of enabled them to
That's
to stay in
fascinating.
charge of their
Yeah.
money and stay relevant. And they changed the whole marketing approach and how they positioned the product, and it just flew.
Oh,
And I
that's
think that insight is still true today. Look at all the
yes.
marketing that banks do. It's go on your yacht, enjoy your holiday stuff, but people want to stay in charge. So that was just for
I think
I
that's
love for
profound.
that.
I think it's really profound. I love these insights. And part of the reason I love these insights is they're more subtle. Everything that you guys have described are more, there's subtlety here. And I think it's really interesting if you're a novice in this area to be like, what's the job to be done? I need to eat something to, like in snacking, there's a lot of stuff. The job to be done is I need to eat something to keep me, full in the middle of the day, right? When in reality, there's much more subtle jobs to be done. Like I need to be staying alert in meetings, and therefore there needs to be this mouth feel, it needs to be crunchy, and it needs to keep me engaged and interested when I'm bored. And there's subtlety there, but I love that it comes back to like even the subtle language of, is it my pension or is it your pension? I think that that's really meaningful. So I want to go to something Jonathan said, which is something I'm really passionate about, which is marrying up tech push and market pull. And Jonathan, you kind of alluded to this with like the notion that we don't want to be a buzzkill. There are ideas that we want to kind of protect and nurture. So I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think this is where you're going. And so we did some research years ago, and I mentioned it before, but over the last 20 years, we've done research, we've published, in peer-reviewed journals about this, that the companies that have gotten the greatest breakthrough are oftentimes the companies that are truly married up tech push and market pull. And it's where you leave them on an even playing field. And we had this discussion before, like, well, isn't it always still need driven? And I'm like, yes and no. The need always has to be there, but sometimes it can be truly a tech push that is looking to see if there's a need. Now, if it doesn't find a need, we're not going to go there. But I think what this raises for me is the notion of unarticulated needs. And it's hard sometimes, right, for consumers to articulate some of the jobs that they don't even really know they need to do. And we see this arise in a lot of places. I'm just going to kind of blah, 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 a few different places. We see sometimes things we pick up in ethnographies, right, where we see people doing something that they couldn't articulate, right? The whole Swiffer story, they're spending more time cleaning the mop than they are mopping the floor. If an alien came to Earth and watched them, they would think that the job they were trying to do was the cleaning of the mop. That's the ethnography. Now you have to see a story behind it, right? We have to see like, where are those pain points behind those behaviors? Another thing I am, because I was more classically trained in psychology when I was doing my PhD, and I read a lot of research and saw this myself about things that people would say they were going to do and they didn't do. So there's this behavioral economic stuff that like Kahneman and Tversky did and others did, where it was like people can't even predict what they're going to eat tomorrow. They're horrible predictors of their behaviors. So if you ask me the jobs to be done when I'm going grocery shopping, I'll tell you one thing, and then my week looks entirely different in terms of what I actually did from a behavioral standpoint. I'll give you one other example. We did this thing with a company one time on vegetables, and that was their kind of their growth area, wanted to grow more in like vegetable products and so forth. And when we asked people how many days a week they ate vegetables, they told us like 5 days a week. And when we actually did the journals, literally they weren't eating vegetables, but maybe 1 day a week. And they were shocked. So there's lots of different areas where people either don't know their behaviors, they want things to do jobs that they're not willing to do themselves, right? I want my donut to work harder for me than I'm willing to work on my diet, right? There are things that we see in behaviors that people can't articulate, and I can go on and on of other examples. So how do we deal with this kind of void where, even when I've worked with consumer insight people at the big Fortune 500s, we'll be in the back room at focus groups and they're pretty jaded. They're like, yeah, I don't believe anything that guy said, and I'm like, okay, where do we go with all of this kind of sense that consumers can't always articulate stuff? So back to you guys.
Well, it's definitely something that jobs be done people talk about a lot. Well, also say jobs be done skeptics talk about a lot. This idea of whether there are unarticulated needs, latent needs. And I'll just describe my own position. First, I think if you are an experienced jobs be done person, and I'll put myself in that category, you really question what you think, because you have an awareness that jobs be done is itself a solution, and therefore I should not love it so much that I close my mind to new ideas.
Sure.
And so when you hear people arguing, you'll definitely hear people that are in their camp. So I don't necessarily believe everything that I think. Having said that, I'm open to somebody explaining to me how a unarticulated need exists, but I haven't heard one yet. And usually this is what it is. When somebody believes they have one, I've got an unarticulated need. The first thing they'll say is, well, nobody knew they needed a microwave before they had one. And you'll quickly explain, well, microwave is a solution. Oh, okay. Sure. So I guess you got me there. But then they'll come up with a different one, and it'll be a behavior. It'll be this or that.
Sure.
And so like if you take, this is an example used in a recent podcast. If you take your car to the, so your car's not running, you're making a rattle, or there's something wrong with it. You take it to a mechanic. You are aware of why you took it to the mechanic. You want to get this thing fixed. Now, you might learn that the rattle is because there's some maintenance that you didn't do, something you were supposed to do. So no, you couldn't articulate this root cause, or you didn't change the oil, or you didn't change a belt, or you didn't, you let something fail. But that's at a lower level of what the solution is. At a high enough level, you knew why you took the car there. And a higher level than that, you want to maintain good transportation. And Absolutely. So usually when the examples that somebody will give for what they believe is an articulated need, it's lower down. It's a behavior. It's something they're doing. It's a solution. Having said that, this is a bit of a complicated question, because but the only way to say it is to say it. A job with a couple exceptions, any job can be a solution depending on your perspective. Absolutely. Maintain your vehicle is a perfectly valid job. I want to maintain my vehicle, but also maintain my vehicle is a solution to having transportation. Having transportation is a solution to traveling from A to B. Traveling from A to B is a solution to this, a solution to that. Yep. And if you play this out in consumer space, and this is a bit of my position. It's interesting. Jan and I met when he asked me this question over Twitter. The ultimate, this is just my position, the ultimate for a human being, a person, is to be at peace. I believe if you play this out, you start with anything, wanting to eat donuts, what doesn't matter. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that? I believe the ultimate now is to be at peace. For a business, the ultimate, with some exceptions of some nonprofits that have certain missions, is to be profitable. Look at anything a business is doing. Well, what will that help you to do? Well, what will that help you to do? Well, what will that help you to do? In a business, you end up at be profitable. For a person, you end up at be at peace. And so we have to dispel a little bit that it's a bit of a false dichotomy, solution versus job. But when somebody believes they've found an unarticulated need, in my opinion, it's just too far down in the solution zone. If like the Swift, for example, they're realizing they're cleaning the thing too much. But if you had asked them, well, what are some of your goals with maintaining your house? I have a feeling they might say, I'd like to spend less time cleaning. I'd like to spend.
Yeah, I agree with you. Go on. I think, Jan, you were going to say something, but I fully agree with you. And I think that it is like two sides of the coin. And I see this all the time when we say it's needs, value creators, and conditions. You can't really completely separate the need from the value creator. Like it is like this. I love how you describe the hierarchy, though. And I'm going to use another word that we use a lot, which we use a lot in a lot of different ways, but toggling. So this idea of toggling back and forth between things. And so what you just described is almost like this toggling of, this need becomes a value proposition that meets another need that's higher, that becomes a value proposition that meets another need that's higher. And I love that. So, Jan, I knew you were going to say something. I want to just throw out maybe one quick thought, because it might build into what you say. And if it doesn't, just keep with your thought and we can come back to this. So the way I see this whole notion of unarticulated need is around stimulus response. Okay. So in psychology, we think about a stimulus and a response. Okay. So when I go into jobs to be done stuff, I don't want a stimulus. I just want like raw stuff. I want as much raw stuff as I can get. But then, and I'll give a story about it in a minute, but then I'm going to sometimes run out of runway. And I find that presenting what's possible from a tech push standpoint actually starts to have people refine the needs better. Like, so I feel like we do ourselves a disservice if we only live in a need space and we don't toggle back and forth between the value creators, the way we can create value, not necessarily the solution, but the ways that we can create value and how those might meet other needs or deeper needs. So I'm gonna go to Jan and then maybe come back to an example of that.
Well, so I mean, there's 1,000 things to comment on. So, but what I really like, so what I found interesting is I think you're touching upon, which is kind of not perfectly arranged in my head yet, but I think some of the things you said are, for me, an argument for jobs to be done.
Yeah.
Another thing, touching on the limits of jobs to be done, I think. So maybe I try to separate it a little bit, because exactly this gap between what people say and what they do, I use that as an argument why you should talk about the job and not about how they use solutions. Because I have for years, I am having I'm a fitness member for 3 years. I've never gone there in the last 3 years. They will be happy about that. But I every January, I believe this is going to be the year. So I think people are terrible. By
the way, you're meeting their needs. Their jobs
right. I think in a business sense,
by people
I'm the
like
best
you.
customer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, but okay. So in a solution world, I think customers are terrible, and they will tell you one thing, exactly the people story. They will tell you one thing at the beginning of an interview, and then you gain their trust, and will tell you a very different thing at the end of an interview. For so I experienced that a lot of time. So I use that as an argument why we should talk about the job and not about the way they use solutions, or at least get from solutions to the need in the discussion, I think is what you alluded to. But I think where you're right on the terms of the limitations of jobs to be done is it depends on the ability to articulate your, just in a general sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So what we quite often get at the end of a jobs to be done interview is that the respondents themselves say, I never thought about it in this way. Well, a lot
Yeah,
of the things
yeah,
became clear to me now that I talked about,
yeah, I love
and I
that.
realized why I'm doing things the way I do. So there is a little bit of an art in there. I'm sure Scott, your experiences as
Yeah,
well. Is you're as an interviewer, you have to make things conscious that usually are routine, that
yeah,
Right.
just flow. And I think
yes,
jobs there, I think is some truth to this unarticulated needs or latent needs or however you want to call this. But because it takes work to become conscious of what it actually is I'm trying to achieve. Sometimes we're so in routine mode we don't even realize it. Maybe there is a limitation there of how much we can articulate. So I think there is like psychological factors probably can influence my needs that I'm not even aware of. But for the purposes that we use jobs to be done for, I think we at least approach quite a lot of is making it more conscious, or at least probably enough to steer innovation in the right way. But that's open to debate. So
I think the only path to excellence in this practice is to do projects in lots of different spaces.
yeah,
And
mm,
that's where that's where you'll sort of see, you'll understand the common principles that as Jan was talking, the example that came to mind was of a surgeon that's done something 10,000 times, and so it's not top of mind why they do this or why they do that. That doesn't mean they can't tell you, but it means it takes more work and conversation. And here's a problem hey, this is confession time. This is a problem we have with clients
yeah,
because
oh my
they
God,
are impatient.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
impatient, and it takes a lot of time and observation, and it just takes work to get all of that info. But it doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean the physician doesn't know. It means they might not think of it. It's just like you really have to work hard. It takes more time, effort, money, but in the end of the day, patience. It takes just like it took patience to solve a technical problem. It takes patience to uncover things. And when a person themselves are a huge part of the solution, and their skills and expertise and habits are a huge part of the solution.
yeah,
So it's not that they can't say it, but it does mean it takes a bit more work to just because they also and more commonly it's not that it's just not that interesting to them. I'm not going to describe the reason I make the cut this way. I use a scalpel. I'm not going to describe that because it's not that interesting to me. I'm sort of, as a surgeon, I'm talking about what's more interesting about. So you have to
yeah,
back up and ask. So a big principle of voice and customer in general, you got to be willing to look stupid. You can't be about
yes,
your
yeah,
ego. So you have
100%.
to, for the things that seem obvious. Well, why did you make the cut that way? No, why did you do this? I mean, even like, why did you why did you, sterilize the instruments then? And they might say, well, they might look at you like you're stupid and say, well, it's because, they'll introduce bacteria. But you cannot, you have to suspend this judgment of, I think I know why they're doing that. And you
yeah,
have to get it all out. And honestly, this is where clients really can make this work very difficult because they feel like you're making us look stupid by asking these dumb questions. But what you're really doing is you're assuming nothing, absolutely
I love that.
nothing to uncover all of this.
yeah.
Mm.
So let me maybe give an example of where I think, so I've seen some things that I think complement this that help expand the benefits of this. I'm on board with everything you said. We did some work with the North Face, and I may have talked about this before, but we did this work with the North Face, and they were looking at this technology. It ended up, displacing moisture rather than wicking it. And they were going to be talking about, again, moisture control, like getting rid of your perspiration. And they weren't going to explain that it displaced it by spreading it across the Swiss cheese fiber. They
Yeah.
just wanted to tell people that because of these special fibers, they were essentially able to get rid of moisture faster.
Hmm.
We brought in these experts, like sponsored athletes. We had Cadran Aker, people that climb Mount Everest. We had sponsored athletes in there. And we purposely chose lead athletes because we needed to convince lead athletes that this was a good technical product, right? because Northwest wanted to regain kind of their chops with those guys, right? Guys and gals. When we showed it to them, they were like, yeah, I don't care about moisture wicking. I don't believe it anyway. It's a bunch of BS. How can it get moisture out but protect me from the rain? None of this makes any sense, right? What happened then was, and I wouldn't say that we're like the best jobs to be done, but we knew that controlling moisture was a big issue. But then we gave them a stimulus. And the stimulus, we weren't giving them a solution, by the way. We were just showing them a technology. We're like, hey, look at this thing. It does this, it does that, it does this. It was kind of like a poo-poo platter of cool stuff that this material could do. And that's when they started to talk more about temperature. And they were like, oh my gosh, like if it could do this, like, please don't talk to me about moisture. Please don't. This is about temperature control, right? And they started to articulate things that I think it would have been difficult for us to get to. Now, temperature control, by the way, is the solution. So temperature control is both the need to maintain core body temperature was the need, but the material allowed for helping with temperature control, right? But the point is that I believe strongly that when you place needs, ways to create value, and trends all on an even playing field, but then you allow them to touch each other. You allow one to push on the other. And I don't mean a solution. I don't mean a canned solution like, here's your product. What do you think? Are you going to use it? I mean, you run your race with jobs to be done. You get everything you can without the stimulus. And then you bring in essentially the tech push range. And a lot of times we don't bring in a single solution. We bring in a range, and we've found some really interesting things. Like, we don't ever show somebody a concept that's like, rendered, a picture or something. Never. What we've learned, and this is really interesting, is when we bring in stimulus, we have to do it in sketch form.
Yes.
It is that subtle. You cannot show somebody a concept because they'll say, why is there a green dot on the side of this package? Yeah. But if you show them a kind of a landscape of, hey, here's a bunch of different ways that things could be solved, they start to articulate, this wouldn't work because I need this. And they articulate a deeper need. This wouldn't work because it wouldn't meet this need. And you're like, hey, what? We didn't talk about that need before. This could work because it could help me here. And so I find that the toggling is the stimulus response is a good way to start to get people to articulate things they wouldn't have articulated otherwise. The other thing, and you talked about experience is a problem, right? The more experience somebody has, the less ability they have to articulate why they're doing what they're doing because they have expertise. Yeah. So what we've found, and this has been fascinating, is we do mixed groups of experts and novices. And when the novices are like, yeah, I don't get it, I would never do that, the experts turn around to the novices and they explain why they would do something. So yeah, it's we can look dumb in front of people. I'm great with that. That's not too hard, but it's kind of comes naturally. But it's when we bring in novices that we have these experts start to articulate the things that the novices, like they start to train the novices by articulating the things you just described that the surgeon can't articulate. So I think there's a few other tricks in at least our bag of what we've done. And I'm curious if you've tried those things and how you've seen those things work.
You just described a great example of the importance of a sample. I mean, a well-determined sample design where you've got a mix of experience. And also, some people will say, well, this is an articulated need because Jim there couldn't tell me. Jim, the surgeon, couldn't tell me. Yeah. But Jim is one person. Across a sequence, some people this is almost more market research independent of jobs being done. I mean, some people are just a wealth of information. They give you tons of information. Some people are like, where's my $75? How long do I have to be here? Yes. And some will have very difficult describing their needs. just since we talked about the surgeon scenario, I mean, surgeons, I found that work with hospitals and teaching situations, educational situations, they are much more able to
Yes,
explain all of
absolutely.
the everything that they do and
Yes,
why, as
absolutely.
opposed to somebody that's really almost sort of like a factory worker, just doing
Yes,
it
exactly.
over and over and over. But that's where a good sample design. So just because Jim can't tell you
I'm
doesn't
with
mean
you.
that
Yeah.
surgeons can't tell you, or if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, the unarticulated need then in this case, I still don't have actually a very clear example. So the example you gave is basically that we're talking about moisture, but actually the
Yeah.
unarticulated need is
I
temperature.
don't think it was unarticulated though. I have a phrase somewhere in my book that says, I don't believe in unarticulated needs. I'm just teasing. I'm just messing with you guys,
Yeah.
right? I'm just pushing on you. But I don't actually believe in unarticulated needs. What I believe is you haven't found the person that can articulate them yet.
Yeah.
That's what I fundamentally believe. And so,
Yeah.
Jonathan, like my example is more, it probably wasn't really as much aligned with the articulated, unarticulated as it was about the value of stimulus and response. What I see value from is that it's the iPhone example, but it's more the apps on the iPhone. That's what I find curious is like, even when apps first started coming out, people would be hard pressed to make some sort of linkage between a need and a digital solution. But that doesn't change that they couldn't articulate their need. I need something that helps me drink. Well, no, that's not the way to say it. I need to drink more water. I forget to drink water throughout the day. Okay, it never occurred to me that my phone could help me do that, right? But that's a solution, right? Now, what I find is that if I can get people to just talk about needs, right? And then I bring like technology push, which I am still a big believer that technology push has a right to play all by itself. It's just got to, in the end, marry up with needs if it's going to be successful. But do I believe that technology push can start to more quickly get people to articulate more granular needs than I would have gotten otherwise? Yes. So I think, Jonathan, my point is it's maybe that it's not unarticulated. They needed temperature control. They all knew they needed that, right? But it's that once you start to give them stimulus, they're faster about articulating granularity in their needs. That's my experience. That's how I kind of toggle back and forth. But Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, I always found the phrase unarticulated needs not very precise, because what kind of needs are we talking about? And one of the things I really appreciated when I learned about Jobs to be Done was precisely, I think it's one of even the first sentences in Tony Ulwick's What Customers Want book, which is, do we have a common definition of needs, and what is a need? And so often I feel that when people talk about unarticulated needs, what they actually talk about is maybe actually unarticulated jobs. Or it could potentially also be actual unarticulated needs in the jobs to be done sense, meaning the metrics. I would like to maybe point back to what Jan said previously. He used the word gap, and as I was thinking about what to say here, I had a dichotomy that we could look at, which is there's the way people want to behave, okay, what their intuition makes them want to do, and then there's the way people should behave. And I think often people describe this difference as there's a descriptive approach and there's a normative approach. Okay, descriptive means you're just looking at how people do things, and then normative is how people should do things. Should being, encompassing all sorts of things, could go from, ethics to just from a utilitarian standpoint, what is most efficient or the, the best way of doing things. But I think it's an interesting thing to consider when we talk about these unarticulated needs, is I think it's very much connected to this gap. So you look at someone and you say, okay, This is how he wants to do this particular task. And then you maybe as an expert, you know how he should be doing it. And where does that difference come from? And I think that gives us some insight into what these unarticulated needs might be. So where is the difference? Well, maybe it's the lack of knowledge. I mean, maybe people just don't know how to do the task, the specific task they're doing in the right way. It could also actually be a higher level problem where people are not clear on the objective that they're trying to achieve. So let's say the jobs to be done, they don't have it really laid down. So I think there's different places this could break down, and I wouldn't deny that people have some unconscious purposes. I think I'm a bit less on Scott and Jan's side on this. I think there would be some unconscious drivers that people have. I think if you do psychoanalysis, you can figure them out. You can think about them. But I think this is anyway, that's what I wanted to say. I think there is a lack of knowledge, but if you think about things, you can access these unarticulated needs.
Yeah, I think one of the places that we saw it, and I think this is where you see it with like technology breakthroughs, right? I think that when you have a technology breakthrough, for example, years and years ago, we did work before there were touch screens, okay? And we were doing work on the future of navigation. And when we talked to people were talking about all kinds of things that they needed in the way of navigating digital devices or various kinds of things, right? And they didn't talk about, I wish I could use my hands in different ways. I wish I didn't have to do this. I wish they didn't talk about that. They didn't, because the notion of touch was so far removed from them. And maybe we just weren't great at doing jobs to be done, but honestly, like they didn't talk about it. But our hack, the way that we got at it, and this is why I still say there aren't unarticulated needs, you just haven't found the person that can articulate them, was that when we went to the broader ecosystem of people that were experts in various areas, some of whom knew ultimately that touch was feasible, that touch navigation on everything, this was work we did for Microsoft years ago, that touch navigation was feasible, they were able to articulate things that then once they articulated them, we were able to come back and ask in different ways, show different stimuli, talk to people in different ways, and start to suss out needs that were quite adjacent to what people were thinking about. So when you think about a larger job of finding information, people weren't talking about their hands. They weren't talking about a desire to use their hands. Yes, you could argue that like ease of use is the macro need. I don't have any doubt about that. But that level of a macro need isn't actually very helpful to me. And so I have no doubt that there are enduring needs, that there are basic human needs, that they all ladder back up to like peace, safety, and, living eternally. I think I'd throw that one in there. People want to live forever in some ways. There's just a lot of things that people want to do that are very enduring. That's why we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These are enduring needs. And I have no doubt that like when we were doing the work on the future of navigation, people were expressing things like ease of use, intuitive, those things. Yeah, sure, they were expressing all that. But it wasn't until we went to the ecosystem of people that could talk about the future of navigation in a lot of different ways, from brain implants to eyeball shifting to touch to all kinds of things, that we were able to come back then to lead users, again, not Joe Schmo, right? But lead users from starting with the broader ecosystem who are true experts in a broad range of potential solutions and needs and can see further, are more prescient. Then we come back to lead users. We start to bring in stimulus. And then we end up cracking open this like, oh my gosh, if I could do things with my hands, if I could move things around conceptually, more so than if I could look at them and move them around with my eyes or my brain or anything else. People are like, I just want to use my hands. That sounds so much more relaxing. And then relaxing, stress, precision, motion, physicality of things, those desires, you could call them needs, but those desires started to come out. So for me, I think that when you're dealing with more breakthrough areas, that we need a balance of get all the jobs I can possibly get, use skilled people. I love the comment, build trust, go deeper, talk to experts, find people that can think verbally and teach and so forth, pair up experts and novices. We've had enormous success with that, but then I think there's a place for the stimulus and a place for going to the ecosystem of experts out there, not expert users, but expert, subject matter experts.
Yeah, the underlying theme I'm hearing through what you're talking about is the famous discussion point of, is it a problem or is it a solution? Let me explain. So imagine you build some kind of product. You're talking about a screen, and when people use it, they find that, for example, it burns their hand or something, or there's some kind of outcome that's maybe even positive, could be a positive thing. Unfortunately, it's often a negative thing, but I don't know, maybe there's some jitter or there's something like this that's going on. How could you have implemented or written down these desired outcomes or these needs, say reduce jitter in the screen, or prevent the screen from overheating because it's uncomfortable, etc.? How could you, if you're trying to innovate and build a new product, how could you actually include the outcomes that are intimately linked to the actual solution that you're going to build? And I believe it's impossible, right? I mean, basically the idea, you can't do it. But I think that is where you have to have some kind of iterative process. What is, at first you start with a high level idea. Okay, am I going generally in the right direction? Am I building something that's going to solve a certain amount of problems and satisfy some needs? And then of course you need to bring a product in front of people and then refine on this, and then your desired outcomes. And in Scott's wonderful book, The Statue in the Stone, he actually talks about this, that jobs are not necessarily always independent of solutions. It's just something you need to keep in mind. But it all depends, in my opinion, on the stage you're at in the innovation process. It might be that at some point you need to constrain the job to the use of the specific product that you're building.
I think that's fantastic. And I think iteration, that notion of toggling back and forth, is key for me. I believe that to really embrace an opportunity, you need to have each thing sit on its own. I think you need to have jobs to be done, needs, all the ways that we think about needs, including ethnographies and other tools like our voice of the ecosystem approach is really, really powerful here. Exhaust every avenue that way, but also exhaust things from a purely creative technical solution standpoint. What could be without constraints? What could be? And then what are the trends? Where do we believe things are going to go? And then start to push these together and toggle back and forth. Bring a landscape of possible solutions back to experts, get them to start reacting to it, that kind of reaction that we would never have had. And as we start to isolate in on solutions, I agree with you, Jonathan. I think, nobody's going to articulate, I don't want it to be hot. I need it to be cool to the touch. If I don't somehow do it wrong in some ways, right? So I think the toggling, the iterative process is key here. So I know we're getting close to time, Jan. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, a lot. Maybe I want to just add a couple of things, or emphasize also what you said, which I like. So I think it's really important that if you go to customers, I want to emphasize, use the solution as a stimulus to get to their needs, not as something that where they can evaluate the new technology, because very often you cannot.
100%.
So that I think is really, really important. I think this whole discussion about unarticulated needs also ties into this, because the people who usually defend this mean something like, well, people cannot tell you what they want unless you put it in front of them, or some version of that.
Sure.
meaning something like that they can only evaluate the solution, really. I think there is a logical fallacy in there, because if you think about it, if they're able to evaluate the solution, the question is
That's
how,
great.
well, how
Yeah.
do they evaluate?
How did they do that?
What
That's a great
criteria?
point. Yeah, I love
And
that.
these, no. So these we can know, and I think that's where Jobs to be Done is trying to get at. Unfortunately, there will never be a perfect solution. At least I believe in the world. Doesn't look like a perfect world. I don't think there is ever going to be a perfect product, because every time you introduce a solution, it creates new problems. So the things that you just mentioned, which are tied to the consumption, or well, basically of the use of a product, unfortunately, the world is fabricated in a way such that there will always be problems when using certain solutions. And I totally agree, Jonathan. Some of them you cannot predict. Some of them you only find when you actually look at the use of a product that is new out there, because it's tied to the solution. So how could you know that?
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love everything you said, and I think that this toggling, I love the fallacy, that there is a fallacy there. How can they evaluate the solution if they can't say their needs in the first place? I
Right.
think the other thing is, I am such a strong believer in, you do not bring a solution, you bring a set. And so in my book, I talk dimensions. So we dimensionalize what solutions could be, and we bring a landscape of those dimensions, and we have people help us work through where in the landscape we need to be. And we also lean in on, to Scott's point, sampling, sampling ecosystem members. So we will do Jobs to be Done, we'll do all this solution set stuff with ecosystem members who aren't even necessarily users, but can actually tell us where the world's going in the future. So it gives us a time continuum as well. So Scott, wrap us up.
Well, I'm reminded of let's just say an ongoing disagreement I had with a pretty well-known thought leader in Jobs to be Done. I won't call out the name, but this is the disagreement. This person says that, well, creating the solution's the easy part, the Jobs to be Done work's the hard part. And I have the exact opposite belief, that the Jobs to be Done part is the easy part. Not that it's easy, but the easier part. The hard part is creating the solution, because here's my logic. In Jobs to be Done, Jan said when we build products, you have to make trade-offs. That's right. But in Jobs to be Done, we don't have to make trade-offs. Like
Yeah.
we just find out what the customer, we should find out what the customer wants in the purest sense. An example I like to give is, just think about your bank account, right? You want these two things at once. You want to access your funds quickly, and you want it to be absolutely secure. You don't want to get in there quickly at the expense of, like, your life savings are gone, your retirement's gone. You want both of those. What kind of trade-off do you want to make on there? I mean, well, when it comes time to log in, well, the truth is you don't want any trade-off. You want it immediate, and you want it to be completely secure. But in reality, there are trade-offs to be made, and so we sacrifice a bit of the time to access, because we will take that two-factor authentication or whatever, because ultimately we value the security more than we value an extra 2 minutes or 3 minutes to access. My point is, in Jobs world, we don't have to make any trade-offs. We can just find out what somebody wants, the absolute sense. But when it comes time to creating solutions, then trade-offs do apply. So I think the Jobs to be Done part's the easy part. I'm not saying it's easy, but actually creating solutions. And Pam, you mentioned a lot about showing concepts, and concept testing is much more fraught with challenges and difficulty and skill of the interviewer. When you're doing a Jobs to be Done project, I mean, again, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a lot more straightforward. Because you're not burdened with what's possible. When it comes time to create something, all of a sudden, the laws of physics eventually will come back into play at some point.
I gotta say, innovation's tough. It's hard. It's hard across the board. I think what you guys have done in terms of getting, building trust, finding ways to really become experts in Jobs to be Done is really admirable, because I think it takes a type of patience, and it takes a type of disbelief where you don't believe the first thing you hear. And I think it takes a deeper understanding of psychology, and that building trust, I think, is really phenomenal. So I don't think it is easy to do what you guys do. I also just think that it's not a sequential thing. That would be the last
Mm.
thing I'd say. Is I think sometimes we treat it as sequential. We've got to start with the need, then we go to the solution. And I completely disagree with that. I still think you have to have three things on an even playing field. Get inspiration from the trends in the future, get inspiration from the needs, get inspiration from what's possible technically. Have technical people have room to breathe and do the most, amazing imaginable things that may not have a home in the future. Have people discover needs and have people think about the future. We bring those together, we actually see the larger opportunities. So yeah, I've got to thank you guys. You've been phenomenal. You've given me so many great insights and I've learned a ton as always. So I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you very much.
Well, it's been
Thank
fantastic,
you.
Pam. And I like as we wrapped up our previous episode, I sort of informally named it "Make Technology Push Great Again," and because I do think that is in the jobs we've done world where we really beat up on this thing of ideas first and solutions first, and we can be a bit dismissive of the importance of that. And so I
Yeah.
think you're helping bringing balance to the universe.
That's
through
my
that. So I
goal.
think you're doing a great job there.
One ring to rule them all. So
That's
yeah.
right.
But what
That's
Jan
right.
said is really important. Is you can use the solution, but then you always need to ask what is the need that that this
Absolutely.
solution brings. That's really, I think,
Absolutely.
a key idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know we're kind of out of time, but I just keep going back to, I'm not in love with showing solutions to people. I
Yeah.
do love showing landscapes so people can point to, this is more about what I'm talking about. This is less about what I'm talking about. This brings up another issue. And I believe that when you find early adopters, when you find ecosystem members, they can operate in that more ambiguous space. But we've had other people that are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why are you showing me this big picture of sketches? Right. So I'm not a big believer in concept testing. I
Yeah.
think it's not right to bring a solution. So yeah, I think we're actually in very similar places, and I'm incredibly grateful for the insights that you've brought. So thank you so much.
Well, excellent.
Thank you, Pam.
Thanks,
That was
Pam.
really
Anybody
fun.
else have any final thoughts?
A gazillion. I think we should schedule a couple.
I know you do. I
We
know
need
you
to do
do,
this
Jan.
like once
I do
a
too.
quarter.
I'm like concept testing. We can
Now
talk
it's getting
about
into the
that.
right.
Yeah,
talk about a lot of
not a big fan of concept testing, so we'll have to talk about that. That's
My,
right.
I would add maybe one final thought that's around really this notion that we started with of behavioral science, and let's say this whole idea of cognitive biases, etc. Because I think that's something a bit different. So, I mean, depending on how you frame something, people act in some way or another, and I think that's something to think about. I mean, how does that play a role in your products? Do you need to integrate strange behaviors of people in your product, even though it's not optimal, or shouldn't you integrate these ideas? So I think that might be an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think that's really, really powerful. And I think some of that gets to when you start asking people to explain their behaviors as opposed to explaining their needs. And I think there's a distinction there. I gave some examples on the last conversation about science that shows that experiments that show that people will behave a certain way, and the reason because you introduced a stimulus and then they behave that way, like it's directly related to, they couldn't solve the problem before, you introduce object X, all of a sudden they can solve the problem. Then when you ask them how they solve the problem, they don't even bring up object X. Okay, we've got lots and lots of data that shows that people can't explain these pathways, but that's different than having them explain needs. And so I think that even with ethnographies are flawed, because people will behave certain ways, and then you have to ask them why they're doing it, and they give you, truthfully, many times things that are made up that sound more logical than actually, they sound more credible and logical than what actually happened. And we've got tons of experimental data, great article telling more than you can know, that shows over and over and over again people explaining behaviors that are experimental design. You can see it is not the reason they did what they said they did.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's an important distinction too, because it actually kind of puts a dink in the armor of ethnographies as opposed to putting a dink in the armor of jobs to be done. So anyway, this is trailing off, and I didn't really expect this last part to be on the podcast. So, you can chop it off wherever you want. But yeah, guys, I'm so grateful for your time and just your insights. And I feel like I've found common ground of people that think very deeply about things. And it's really a blessing. What I'd love to do, to be honest, is find some engagements where we could bring you guys in, because you do have the deep expertise that we don't have. We've got enough to be dangerous. We've got other tools that I'm really proud of with the voice of the ecosystem. Very proud of that. I'm very proud of some of the experimental design work we've done with early adopters and later adopters, and the stimulus we show. I'm very proud of that. It's quite unique to what we do. But what we aren't great at is establishing some of those needs up front. And so I'd love to see if there's a way sometime to bring you guys in with a client where they'd be willing to balance these approaches.
Excellent. Then
hey, these two guys are great. I can recommend them.
Very good. All right. Well, excellent. Well, that, friends, concludes today's Product Quest podcast. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to us anytime at productquestpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll see you next time. All right.
It was fun being on the other side.
All right. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.